All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are going to get started here in just a moment with Michelle, Skill in Action, for our much anticipated IG Live. Sarah! Hi, Sarah. How are you? Hi, Marit. Hi, Michelle. I see you. I see you. Yes. Why is it not letting me accept? Like what? Yeah.
Hey.
Hello. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you? It's
I'm
so
good.
good to see
I'm
you
good.
too.
It's
I've
nice
been
to see
really
you.
waiting, anticipating this conversation.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you for inviting me
thank
to
you
be
so
part
much
of
for
this
accepting.
series.
So, Michelle, I know you're busy. You are doing many things. And how much time do we have today? Just so I know how to pace things. Beautiful.
Oh, I blocked
Awesome.
out an
Yes, that's what I
hour.
had in mind too.
So,
So, welcome everyone. We'll get right into it. Welcome everyone to this Ashtanga Intersections Emergent Healing Spaces conversation. It's part of my ongoing Amplify Black Voices, Amplify Melanated Voices that I started back in 2020. And I'm just, hoping we're going to have good internet connection and this conversation will go with fewest possible obstacles. So, Michelle, it's so good to see you.
hmm
And the way I've just been offering folks to come is just to, call themselves into the space in whichever way makes sense for them and feels right for them in the moment. So, would you mind just letting the folks know how you're showing up today?
yeah, so my name is Michelle Cassandra Johnson, and my pronouns are she and her. I live on the ancestral land of the Catawba, the Cherwa, the Tutelo, the Saponi, the Occaneechi, and many other tribes in
Mhm.
Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And it is a sunny morning. I think it's going to be a beautiful day. So I'm coming in with gratitude for the
Mm.
warmth of the sun and the lush green trees around me. And I'm feeling really grateful to be in this space with you and all those who've joined us. So that's a little about how I'm coming
Thank you
into this
so
space.
much for calling yourself in, as well as just speaking to the myriad indigenous folks upon whose land you are co-inhabitating with. Um, so, Michelle, to say that you have had an effect on my work, the work I do in the world, and my internal work I do in spirit is an understatement. I came to know of you. It was back in, early 2019. I think it was through your dismantling racism course with Off the Mat into the World.
hmm
And just
Yes.
the fact that you were, you are a Black woman, a Black American woman, a yoga teacher, and the intersections in which you embody, both personally and professionally, I was just like, wow. And so I'm just feeling humbled. I consider you a very seminal, essential mentor of mine. And in fact, I emailed you and said,
hmm
can I please call you my mentor? And you said yes.
hmm
So I just feel a little bit humbled and I need to take a moment. I'm sitting here with your book. I got a copy of your book and
Mm.
which I'm in.
And
And
you're
so I'm
in?
just like, I need to get to North Carolina so that I can get Michelle to sign this book. And so I'm just sitting in a lot of gratitude and expansion and spaciousness and just taking in this moment. So thank you. Did you know, Michelle, I went to school in Winston-Salem.
Oh, I
Yeah,
feel like at some
it
point
was
I did know that.
back in the
I'm
day, in
accompanied.
96, 97. I was studying at North Carolina School of the Arts, modern dance. So,
Oh, you were. Okay, yeah. We didn't dive into it, but I was
right.
not here then in Winston, but I love
Yes.
that connection as well. And I never really thought I would end up in Winston, so it's
There's
funny that
something
we're connected
about North
in that
Carolina
way.
that's pulling me. Like I know so many people in North Carolina. I'm like, what is it about North Carolina that like there's some kind of like unfinished, stuff I got going on over there. So you might see me sooner than later over there.
Yes.
But
Come
yeah,
on
so
over.
I just really wish to call in. There's a quote that I use in every offering. I nearly every offering I give, and I just wish to call in the wisdom of your words, because this really just set me down the trajectory I find myself on. And I remember I was listening to a podcast. It might have been with you and Kelly, or just you, and I was literally like writing and pausing and going back 15 seconds and writing again, because I was like, I must internalize the words that this wise medicine woman is giving to me. So folks on the live, thank you so much for joining. I just offer that you create as comfortable and as intentional a space as possible, so we can have this co-creation together with ease, and just enter into the medicine. So your words, which shifted so much in me, with this: I started practicing yoga, was entering into spiritual spaces or wellness spaces and not seeing myself reflected there. And also not hearing a conversation about suffering that was happening in the world outside of that room. And the connection between the suffering outside of that room and the suffering happening inside. There wasn't a container to hold a conversation about how yoga was connected to the collective and the harm that we experience and the suffering we perpetuate. I experienced the absence of that conversation over and over and really yearned for it. I longed for it. I thought, if people in the yoga spaces aren't going to have these conversations, I'm going to start the conversation, end quote. So, do you remember the context in which these words happened, and just what you were experiencing, as I know you came from the anti-racism work and the social justice world and social work world and entered into yoga through those paradigms. But if you could just speak to just like how your experience was as a yoga practitioner in the global north and how all this kind of came about. That would be amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for sharing the quote. It's so funny when people do that because I don't always remember. Of course, I know who I
You
am and how I
channel so
show up, but I
much,
don't
and
always
it does
remember how
come
I
from like
articulate.
another realm. So yeah, it's like I said that.
Always. I'm like, oh, but it
Totally.
sounds like something I would say. Yeah, and I don't remember if what podcast that was on, or interview, or conversation, and it's the theme of the quote, which is really about how essential it is for us to center a conversation about what is happening internally and
Mhm.
externally, and how there is no separation, right? That this theme has shown up over and over. And in the quote that you read, I am sure I was speaking to my confusion, dissonance, frustration with wellness and yoga spaces who were offering a practice that, as we know, is rooted in understanding why we suffer and creating conditions for liberation, to be liberated selves and souls. And I didn't feel like there was a real deepening into understanding what it means to apply or live
Yeah.
into our practice of yoga, which would require us to
Yeah.
reckon with and contend with why we suffer. We can't bypass that. And so I'm sure I was speaking to that, and it really spoke to my experience as a Black person who's only grown. I've been in America for most of my life and grown up in the States, and in a white supremacy culture, and then to go into a wellness space or a space that says it's for wellness and have an experience of isolation through there not being other Black, Indigenous, people of color, bodies of culture within this space. Many groups who are marginalized were missing from this space, and without this conversation about why, and also how the industry was perpetuating suffering, and creating barriers to liberation by trying to spiritually bypass. So much of my work has been about us reckoning, us responding to what is, us really illuminating the truth or the multiple truths that people are experiencing, and us trying to remove some of these barriers that are in the way of us being free.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And yeah, I just want to take a moment because, you know, I have been doing yoga now in predominantly white, cis, heteronormative spaces. And there was always a sense of like, you know, you go and you are participating in this indigenous South Asian medicine, this practice. And so you're accessing glimpses of liberation. You're touching into the infinite source, you know, you're getting, you know, these, you know, downloads, and, you know, and then like once you're kind of out and you're interacting and having conversations, it's all of a sudden it feels just super jarring. And I never like had, you know, and I've been, you know, in isolation, and, you know, you speaking to the real loneliness and alienation and heartbreak that one feels, you know, being, you know, the only one, and you're just having these like, you know, intuitive hits, like something is a little off here, something feels a little funky, but I don't know what. Right. And so when I came across the first edition of Skill in Action, I read that, and then I was just really going deep into your work and listening to your podcasts, and, you know, taking your offerings online. It was like, oh, like this is what it is, and this is giving me vocabulary, and oh, that's what that was when that happened. And so I think what I'm getting at is the importance of naming the thing, and how so much of the dynamics that inform this generic like norm in the world, but we're speaking specifically to wellness spaces and yoga spaces, how so much of the norm is to leave things unnamed, and the oppression and the heaviness that creates. So I guess I'm just speaking into that dissonance. You feel like, wait, y'all say you're here for liberation work, y'all say you're here for freedom, and yet like we're not gonna actually go there in the end. So that's just what's coming up for me from what you shared. And I just wanted to just appreciate the fact that like the vocabulary and naming the thing is such an integral, has been such an integral part of my healing process and my deepening into the consciousness of what it means to be a spiritual being, but also, you know, a Black woman in the world.
Yeah, it's so I love that you spoke to that, and the naming a thing, which I think about and practice so much in many spaces. And I was just talking about it, I think, in a book reading about We Heal Together. Like we can't recover. I think I was talking about recovery, and we can't recover unless we name what we're recovering from, and like acknowledge it and touch whatever part of it we can touch or hold, even if it's not really tangible, right? We can't do we can't shift it or transform it or transmute it unless we sense it, see it, feel it, unless we allow ourselves to be with it. And the resistance to naming, because there's fear, because there's implication, it's deep, because there's conditioning and shaping. It's like people are entrenched in this way of being that is so counter to naming the truth of what is. Because they're benefiting, because they don't want to look at it, because they don't know. Again, there's so many different reasons. And you know, I'm sure you've heard me talk about the
Yeah,
story of my middle name,
I have.
Cassandra, and
Yeah.
in mythology, she
Yes.
was a prophetess and a truth teller. And, you know, my mom, the name came to her when she was in the grocery store. I think I was speaking to her. And it, of course, I didn't know what my name, the story of
Mm.
Cassandra, until I was about 21, when a professor randomly sort of told me
Yeah.
this story. And I was like, oh, it makes sense. It makes sense. Like, this makes
Totally.
sense, that I felt this in my body, or like
Yeah.
felt the calling to say, this
Yeah.
is what's happening right now,
Yeah.
right? Does
Yeah.
anyone else see it? Can we talk
Mm.
about it? I mean, I was that kind of child, and really wanting that. Can we deal with what we need to deal with? Can we at
Mm.
least talk about it? Can we say what it is? Because I was, in the absence of that, I was sort of left with, am I the
Whew.
only one feeling this? On top of being conditioned in a white supremacy
Yeah.
culture that says you're the problem,
Oof.
and you're making up racism, and you're making up white supremacy. You know, it was like being a curious child, and then being shaped in a culture that's trying to really shut down that curiosity, but also isn't encouraging us as a collective to talk about what we need to talk about. And then for me to
Mm.
internalize that something was wrong with me, right? It was so deep. And so I love that Cassandra somehow came in. And I love that I just, it's just in me to want to name things. And so many people with Skill in Action in particular, well, it was when the first edition came out, so many people said, thanks for
Mm.
telling the truth. Thanks for, and so I feel like that is one of the things that
Yeah.
little 100-page book did, right? It's like, I'm going to tell a truth from
Yeah.
my perspective and my experience. And it matched and mirrored what other people had experienced, like yourself, and were experiencing, and gave some language to say, this is it. It's not you,
I
it's the
mean, there's
culture. It's
so
on
much
purpose.
I could unpack in what you said. First of all, I love the name Cassandra, and second of all, like I totally resonate and feel so validated, because I was also that curious kid that was always like, tell the truth, and like the lengths to which people will go to evade it and to protect the lie. I'm like, aren't you tired?
Right.
Like, and so I recognize my little curious, seeker of truth. I'm a Sagittarius, you're a Leo, so we got that fire sign going, but it's just like let's
Yeah.
name it so we can, transmute it and be free, be free of it all. You know what I'm saying? And it speaks to me like what something I've been sitting with a lot is that, freedom isn't free. It requires risk. And
Mhm.
so what does that mean when we're part of this industry that is in, these systems of oppression and extractive capitalism? What does it mean, like, when the, our duty is truth and liberation, but all around us, I
Mhm.
feel like I'm swirling in the waters of comfort, and like just kind of stay comfortable and just keep buying, and I'll sort of sell you these half truths that make you feel good. So I don't know, like, how do you kind of sit with that and negotiate, the waters in which we're swimming as yoga teachers, around the fact that many of us would prefer to stay comfortable, rather than actually like have the truth revealed.
Yeah, I mean, this is making me think about when I was practicing as a clinical social worker, and um, working with people, and myself, really, at times, if I think about my own journey in life, that this idea that there's comfort in the
Mm.
places where dis-ease exists, right, or where patterns that are harmful exist, always struck me in that practice, because um, I recognize, and this fits in with yoga philosophy and the kleshas and samskaras in our patterns, I recognize that I can become used to a pattern and habituate and do it in an unconscious way. And I'm not always
Mm.
sure that means I'm comfortable with it. And I just saw this a lot in myself or with clients I was working with. Like, are you really more
Mm.
comfortable with
Mm.
being in pain? Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? In this particular way. And I name this because while I recognize those of us who are more proximal to power, depending on our points of privilege, are afforded or are provided more comfort and afforded more ease. I recognize this. I wonder if we're awake at all, and if we're reckoning at all with what's going on, if we're comfortable. Like, it makes me very curious about that. And if more of what we're doing in response to capitalism and our discomfort is numbing out and consuming because we know something's wrong. Like, we know something's wrong. I'm not going to say everyone, but a lot of people do, and some people choose to do nothing about it, and some people choose to escape from it, and some people choose to lean into it. And it might depend on the context and what's at risk, and our points of privilege and oppression. So I think it's deeply nuanced. I want to say that. But I always wonder, like, if I think about white supremacy within the culture of, meaning the industry of yoga, the sort of cultural norms around that, are people comfortable that they're like teaching and offering a liberatory practice that may not even be from their lineage in spaces, and they're doing it in a way that doesn't actually honor the roots of the practice, and they're not actually engaging the practice to respond to what's alive and happening?
No,
Maybe.
thank you for that. That's a really good point. And I just want to speak to the nuance of it all. And what came up for me is that, like, maybe it's not comfort, and it's just like there seems to be such a habituation to ways of being, and so it's an almost like maybe lack of imagination, and just like it almost feels like, how can things be even any different? Because just the karmic momentum of all the moments that have come before that are informing this one, like, I'm just one person, what can I do, like, that kind of thing. So I think the numbing out is huge. I think the escapism is huge. I think the false comfort, let's say, that proximity to power and material privileges, for lack of a better word, offer, just almost creates this like complacency, let's say. But I appreciate that, because I was saying comfort, and now it's disrupted that for me in a very good way. So thank you for that. Habituation, I would say it's habituation.
Yeah. And I do want to say, like, there are people who on a spiritual level, I'm not sure anyone's comfortable with what's going on. I think that's what I was responding to. And on a material level, because people are benefiting, certain folks are benefiting, they're very comfortable or very complacent, or numbing out from how other people are having a different experience than they are, right? Like, all of this feels true in what you said, and it speaks to risk. And some people, I'm very clear, there are many people who are not willing to risk something for my liberation. That's the context we're in. And so that might mean they're more comfortable in their role, or they're uncomfortable and unwilling to take a risk. I don't know. I think it's making me curious too. Like, it's, and I think the point is, like, if we're awake and uncomfortable at all, we have to name the thing. We have to understand why. We have to put action behind that. We have to think about what's within our power to do, to shift what is going on. We can't just talk about it. We actually have
do
to
things.
Redistribute wealth and use our resources if we have them, right? And really day to day, every day, think about what we can do to create conditions for everyone to have what they need and thrive in solidarity and relationship with those less proximal to power. So yes.
I just want to take a moment to take in what you said. And if we can please just shift. I know you've been busy with your new book, We Heal Together. Y'all, if you haven't gotten your copy of We Heal Together, don't sleep. I just got it this last week, so I'm super happy I was able to, like, bring it in. And like I said, I'm going to come to Winston-Salem and get a signed copy. I would love to talk about now healing, what it means, healing, and in specific healing in community. Because June 2020, I took your online healing in community. And let me just say, like, the depths in which we traversed together, Michelle. The ripple effect is ongoing. And now I called in I called in some of your words, and I just love to share with the folks what I contributed to your book. So if you'll please permit me, Michelle, I wish to call myself in, because this healing in community goes deep. So here we go. This is what I wrote in Michelle's new book, We Heal Together. Since participating in Michelle's Healing in Community weekend in June 2020, I have felt such a profound shift in what it means to heal. Healing in community is a return to imagining who and what we are when we're not defining ourselves in response to structural oppression. It is an invitation to show how magical and limitless we all are, should we choose to align ourselves in shared humanity as opposed to domination and control. Healing in community is an offering to prioritize vulnerability, heartbreak, and grief rituals. It's hope when despair would have the final say. It's the lantern at the deepest, darkest hour. It's bird song at earliest dawn, embracing darkness and her cryptic ways. So thank you, Michelle, for that medicine. And you were together with Lama Rod, but specifically during that healing in community in June 2020, that's when I really, in fact, it was earlier, it was during Skill in Action. I remember it was that summer. So it was a year earlier when I read Skill in Action, when I believe it was with Khalif Browder, when I came to know the story of young Khalif Browder, where I truly touched into what it means to grieve. And have your heart broken, and not for okay, your nearest and dearest, your loved ones passing on, but it was for somebody I never met in person, but just the story of what this young man went through, and having your heart just completely break open. So grief rituals and grief work, using your deck of cards, your tarot cards, those were sort of the initiatory practices into grief work. Might you speak into the importance of what it means to have grief and grieving as part of life and spiritual practice?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for contributing
My pleasure.
to We Heal Together, and of course, co-creating that magical space we experienced in June of 2020. Yeah, and for those watching, the June 2020 offering, Wambu is referencing Healing in Community, was an idea that was planted in me. I'm sure my ancestors planted the idea inside me, and then it grew into what was going to be an in-person offering and became an online offering, of course, because of COVID-19. And 40 people gathered together online, and there were 5 of us facilitating, 4 or 5 of us facilitating, and it was such a profound learning experience for me and healing experience. And particularly at that time, because I think people needed something to hold on to, even though we were all online. It was what is happening to us? We're reeling from this. And so it was so powerful. And that, of course, led to We Heal Together, but also Finding Refuge, my second book, which is about grief and spiritual practice. And We Heal Together is, I would say, a continuation of that, and more focused on communal practices with one another and why we need each other and how we're in relationship with one another. But practice and Skill in Action, Finding Refuge, and We Heal Together is the through line for sure, spiritual practice. And, in Finding Refuge, I share stories about grief and brokenheartedness in the way you were speaking about, and a story of just being shattered and in pieces and not sure how I was going to come into wholeness again. And that my practice, spiritual practice, is what helped me through that and continues to now. And We Heal Together, the way I talk about grief is through what we've named, naming a thing, and reckoning what we're reckoning with, and really how fractured and isolated we have been. not just because of COVID-19, but that for me was a different experience of isolation and fragmentation for sure, but also because of all of the systems of oppression that work to separate us from ourselves and from one another and from the planet and from everything that has been and is now. So when we heal together, I talk about grief and liberation and the connection between the two, which is really what Healing in Community, the online summit, it ended up being online, you're referencing, was about, that we need to acknowledge and honor our, of course, individual grief and our collective grief and our experience of cultural trauma in order to heal. We can't bypass the acknowledgement of what we're experiencing on the planet at this time as a collective, even as we're experiencing the planet differently and the different systems, right, are affecting us in disparate ways, that we have to honor what is present and the trauma that continues to replicate itself and be unhealed, right? We have to acknowledge these things in order to heal. And We Heal Together is really a call for us to do that in community with one another. And the link between grief and liberation, just, there are many, but the sort of way I speak about it most simply is that when we make space to name a thing, when we make space to honor what we are moving through as a collective, and the cultural trauma that is alive at this time and the harm that's happening, when we acknowledge it, when we grieve it, when we have a practice of some sort to anchor us, to hold us, to help steward us, to help us move through the long dark, which many people talk about this time as a period of darkness, right? It's uncertain. We don't know where we're going. That there's something that is released when we are able to acknowledge what is and actually move through a grief or a grieving, a process of grieving, that we may be closer to a space of liberation in our psyches and souls and spirits. And if we don't make the time to acknowledge and grieve, that what happens is grief stagnates, trauma continues to replicate itself. We continue to distract ourselves from what needs attention. We resist our healing. And that has so much to do with why we are experiencing what we're experiencing on the globe right now, as I think about trauma and harm, right? It's unhealed, right? It's the things people are unwilling to name. It's the structures and systems that hold power in place for a small group of people. It's the way marginalization happens. It's the extraction and mining that we do of this earth as if we're not the earth, right? As if we're not in deep relationship with the soil. It is it's this experience on this planet, as I think about dominant culture, is like antithetical to what yoga says, which is that we are not separate from anything. And yet there's so much telling us we are. And so even grieving that, right? This myth that we're separate. So that's a little about grief and making space to grieve and a practice. So we feel held and instead of feeling untethered as we do this. And so that we feel like we're in community with one another.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm feeling what you're saying in my body, and I'm feeling myself slow down, and I'm just taking it all in. So thank you so much. There is a whole heck of a lot to grieve. And something, in my, with Lama Rod, I had the great fortune to practice with him when he was in the UK. I did his retreat there and, just working with his community in the Tantric Buddhist lineages. Right now it's like, well, either the chaos consumes you or you consume it. And so I really, like to think of, active grieving practices as a way to just really like eat the world, eat the chaos. Otherwise, you're going to get totally like subsumed by it, whatever form that looks like. And I had something else on my mind that's gone now. Let me see if I can get it back. You know, it's funny because on some podcasts I've been in my Ashtanga yoga community, and I talk about grieving and everything, I'm often met with, oh my God, I could never do that in a group. Like for me to grieve, I gotta be all alone, like crying my tears, and I could never, And so like, I wonder if there's kind of like maybe misconception around what grieving is and what grieving practices are and what it means to grieve together. Bayo Akomolafe, I just gotta call him in because he is a prophet visionary who wears grief well. He wears it so well. I was attending a summit he did recently, where he said, one good way, like you could think about like our grief ritual is that you start at grief and we end in gratitude. And I just found that like, it just touched such a just a place of knowing within me. So I'm wondering, Michelle, like for folks who are like terrified at the fact, like I'm going to grieve with people together and it's going to be tears and it's going to be like messy and uncontrollable emotions, like what is a grief ritual practice, and what does it mean to grieve together in community?
Yeah, I hear you about people's questions, I would say, and curiosities about how to grieve in space with others, and
Yeah,
also
yeah,
fear
yeah,
around that, or just the not knowing what does that look like because of the deep conditioning
yeah,
around not making
yeah,
space to grieve or grieving in private, which is not true for every person or every culture. It's certainly been my experience in my family, which had to do with their shaping, and in the culture in which I've been, dominant cultural norms say
right,
don't grieve out loud. And yet there are communities, and I think about, whenever a brown or black body is taken by white supremacy and specifically police violence,
that's
there are black and brown
right,
communities who are
that's
grieving out loud. What dominant culture calls it is writing,
right,
but what people are
right,
doing
right,
is
right,
actually
yeah,
crying and
yeah,
screaming and saying,
mm.
listen to me, and when is this going to change? And we have to take care of our
Mm-hmm.
own communities because you
Mm-hmm.
never will. Like, people
Mm-hmm.
are
Mm-hmm.
grieving out loud. I've always understood that to be, that's what's happening. You can call it something else. And the other thing about your question about grief rituals, and then I'll just speak specifically to some, is there are two things. One is I'm curious to know what's happening when we're in space together and we're not acknowledging our
Mm-hmm.
grief. What are we doing? I think is like fill in the
Right.
what is happening, because in my experience it's in people's bodies
Ooh.
even when they don't acknowledge it. It's in the
Yeah.
circle even if we don't
Yeah.
uplift it or name it as grief. It's like in the sighs, right? People when they a
Right.
deep exhale, right? It's in the way people hold their bodies,
Yeah.
right? It's present. And so it's making me be like, well, what are we
Right.
doing when it's just on the surface
Right.
all the time? It's right there. It's
Mm.
right there. We just have to touch it and speak to it. And someone has to be brave enough to say, I'm
Mm.
feeling heartbroken today, or ask the question, how is your heart? Which will get people into what they're grieving and where there's brokenheartedness right away. And we'll get people into a space of gratitude too, of like, I talked about the sun at the beginning of this, and gratitude for that amid a chaotic world where no doubt terrible things are happening right now,
Right.
right? I'm not even aware
Right.
of all of them. But that was on
Yes.
purpose to be like,
Yes.
and this,
Yes.
right? And there's something else. So I want to name that, and also name that grief rituals, as I think about history and as I think about lineage, grief rituals certainly can involve
Right.
mourning and wailing and crying and screaming.
Mm-hmm.
They can also include dancing and singing and gathering around the table and breaking
Mm-hmm.
bread together and sitting in
Yeah.
silence with one another, listening to the breath, right? And holding hands, right? Um, it's, I think people have a misperception depending on their sort of where they're from and sort of culture and their shaping and conditioning around grief. But if I think back to not that far back, right? If I think about lineage, and actually for us all, if we could trace far enough back,
Mm.
grieving didn't take on one form. It actually took on, there were so many
Yeah.
ways. It involved engaging the elements, right? And dancing in the rain, right? And some of these things were also celebratory. So it wasn't grieving in isolation, and that was
Yeah.
the only thing being focused on. Like, we're capable of
Yes.
holding multiple things at one time, and often
Right.
we're experiencing multiple
Right.
emotions at one time. So I would invite people into thinking about all of the different
Yeah.
people grieve
Yeah.
through making art, right? Singing and dancing is that, but creative expression. We have all of these examples. So I would
Mm.
invite people to think expansively
Oh,
about
I
grieving in
love that.
community
I
with one
love
another.
that. The expansiveness of grieving in community with one another, as well as the multidimensionality of it. I was just listening to a podcast about Slavic traditions, before the Catholic Church came in and said, let's get all serious about things. Like folks would go like during Easter to the graveyards, and it was like a week long like food and dancing, and you're there with your ancestors and you're just having a party, and that was what it meant to grieve those that had come before. And then the church came in and was
Right.
like, y'all are having too much fun, let's shut it down, you're gonna have one day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just came to my
Right.
mind because I just listened to it recently, like that there is so many ways, there are so many ways to grieve. And on the other side of grief, there is joy and there is freedom and there is, that spacious liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I'm thinking, is it Alice Walker? Hard times require furious dancing. And I love that because I did so much furious
Mm-hmm.
dancing during 2020. Like, this is just too much for my body to bear, so I'm just gonna go and like invoke the wind, or just like like, so it's intense. It's definitely not grounding, but it definitely mobilizes things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love
So
that.
Michelle, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
cognizant that we're starting to just kind of round it into the hour. You are writing so much. I'm
It's
like, if I
true.
can
It's
get
very
one book
true.
published
Yes.
in my life, I will feel accomplished. So I just want to shout you out. Like, so you have Skill in Action, 1 and 2 editions. You have Finding Refuge, We Heal Together. And then you have another book coming out, or has it already come out? Could you please speak to that one?
Yeah, it's available for pre-order. It comes out on August 8th. Um, it is published by Beacon Press, and it
Mhm.
is A Space for Us, a guide for leading Black, Indigenous, and people of
Nice.
color affinity groups. So it
Wow.
is what it says. It is I wouldn't say, it is a guide that includes curriculum, content, journaling prompts, um, how to set up affinity groups in an organization or in community. It includes a lot of different contributors as
Yay.
well. Stephanie Goston Paul is one of them, um, but different people who I've worked with throughout time who lead affinity spaces and just contributed
Awesome.
and have different identities and perspectives. There's a whole inquiry in this in A Space for Us about when we meet
Mm.
as bodies of culture together and when we actually separate. So there's a Black affinity group, there might
Right.
be a mixed roots affinity group or a Latin affinity group. So that's, for example, there's information about that. It has so many resources, and to my knowledge, there is not another. It's the first
Mm.
guide of its kind that really focuses on leading BIPOC
Right.
or bodies of culture, but BIPOC affinity groups. Um,
Mm.
I'm so excited
Mm.
about it, and cannot wait to work with it. And I'm going to co-teach a
Nice.
course with Stephanie in 2024 focused on the book and with folks who want to lead affinity groups. And I would say that it is for people who want to guide affinity groups, and it is for people who are
Okay.
interested in participating in them, because the journaling prompts and like the content around racial identity, and you've experienced this in some of my work and courses, someone can read this who will never lead an affinity group but is interested in participating, because it's a journey in better understanding your racial identity, how you navigate the world, how the world is landing for you, the chaos in the world, being that you are a racialized being, and we all are. And so it has a dual purpose. I feel that it's, yes, it's a guide, but it's also an invitation to deepen into understanding who we are, and the narrative we want to hold about who we are and how we want to be in relationship with one another and hold space. So excited. It's available for pre-order, and when people pre-order, they get access to 2 affinity groups that I am leading, one in June and I think one in July. And one's focused on healing from racial trauma, and the second one is more focused on, if you're interested in leading an affinity group, here are some things that I've learned about it.
Oh, well, congratulations. So y'all, you've heard it from here. Go pre-order the book, and I'm going to definitely go check that out. And yeah, congratulations. I can hear the excitement in your voice, and I know that offering you're going to do with Stephanie is going to be fire. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that when the time comes. Anything else that's going on for you? I know you have with the Dream Team a weekend coming up. So I took the Art of Skillful Facilitation not once but twice, and it's amazing. It's talk about healing in real time and naming the thing as it shows up. Like, we just had Stephanie Ghost and Paul here a month ago with a beautiful conversation, and so if you could just speak about those offerings coming up with the Dream Team, and yeah, just love to let the folks know.
Yeah, I love this. I love that you participated.
I just keep
twice,
participating.
Just how much.
But I'm doing your teacher.
Yeah,
I'm doing your 200
much
hours. So that's my priority this year. Yeah.
Yeah. I just love Art of Skillful Facilitation is a 5-day online. It has been online experience. It's different every time. It is for people, facilitators, who facilitate and hold space in many different settings, and it's dynamic in that it changes based on who's there. Even though we talk about self-care as a facilitator or talk about working across difference, we center on race and gender, although we bring in other identities and our whole selves into this space, but it's different every time. So since we've offered Art of Skillful Facilitation 4 times, maybe 5 times, and we've begun to talk about what else do we want to offer. And so in June 23rd and 24th, we're offering a 2-day online session. It's called Creating the Container, Meeting the Moment, or Creating the Container to Meet the Moment. And it speaks to the chaos you and I were talking about in the world, and the trauma that is alive in spaces we hold, and the level of trauma and hypervigilance and just unsettled nervous systems that we might be responding to as facilitators, and then our own nervous systems. So it's really in response to, like, the moment keeps shifting and things keep happening and we can't keep up with the news cycle, right? And how do we respond given that the context, I mean, the patterns are the same, but the way we receive information is different than 10 years ago, for example. It's like rapid pace. And so this offering is really about that. How do we respond and hold ourselves within that space and hold groups? And then we'll offer another round of Art of Skillful Facilitation, I think in March of 2024, because in October of 2023, so 2023, we're talking about all sorts of things. Stay tuned is what I'll say, because we're talking about an in-person offering, and we're going to continue to offer what you've participated in, which is a 5-day online. So stay tuned. Often those offerings are on my website, but I'm working in collaboration with many other facilitators. Well, I can
wholeheartedly recommend Art of Skillful Facilitation. I would do it again, but I'm taking Michelle's 200-hour YTT and prioritizing that. One thing I always like to ask folks, you're stateside based, your context is the US. As a Kenyan American who is heavily engaged in the conversations, but in Europe, I met with a lot of resistance And people are like,
Yes.
that's a US thing, so shut the fuck up, you know? um,
Yeah.
what might you
People don't want to
say,
hear it.
to somebody who's just like having these conversations in isolation in a non-US context? Like, this is a global system, right? So, like, just, yeah.
Yeah, often what I say is that, um, particularly in like a training space or something, which is not this, but often what I say is, colonization and colonialism have touched almost
Yeah.
every part of the planet. And so the patterns that we are talking about, related to the US, um, translate to other spaces. And I invite people to think about how that's happening, given that colonization has touched
Yeah.
us all, almost every part of the globe. Um, and I would also invite people to, um, if they don't want to respond to that, to think about, how extraction, how, separation, how disconnection, how patterns of harm that are systemic and rooted in institutions and
Mm.
cultural norms, how these things are emerging. They may not describe them as in the same way as I
Yeah.
would, but they're present. Like,
Yeah.
this idea that we're separate
Yeah.
pervades the globe. If we think about humans, the natural world and non-human
Right.
beings understand they're not separate and they're part of an
Yeah.
ecosystem. We're the ones who are
Absolutely.
confused. Like, we are the
Yeah.
ones who are
Yeah.
completely confused about this. And so we can look to the natural world for cues about how
Yes.
we understand how we're in
Yes.
deep relationship with everything. And I would invite people to look at,
Right.
and how are we being told we're not, and what policies are in place
Right.
that continue to separate us, and how this
That's
is
right.
happening very intentionally.
That's
It didn't
right.
just get pulled
That's
out of the
right.
air. People made
Yeah.
decisions throughout history and time that created the
Mm.
cultural context in
Mm.
which we're living right now. Be that in the
Michelle, in the meantime, oh,
back.
yay.
Oh, there you
Yay,
are.
we're back.
Yeah,
No, thank you so much to speaking to the fact that this is a global, intentional agenda of separation rooted in time and history and,
right.
colonialism, and now the ongoing extractive capitalism and the ramifications it has on our climate and the natural world. So Michelle, oh, and I'm just reminded, I just read in the news recently, there was one like member of parliament in Greenland, and Greenland was colonized by Denmark, who refused to speak Danish in parliament. She was like, nah, I'm going to speak in my language. And I was just like, yes. So there is an awakening and a
Yeah.
global uprising going on. And so, like, just speaking to the interconnectedness of this work, like it is, the ripple effects are definitely there. And so I was super happy to read that news story of like, nope. But last question, I would love to know if there is a particular element that you are working with at the moment and what you might be doing today to resource yourself.
I love this question. I've been leading a meditation from We Heal Together, or variation of a meditation, and We Heal Together in many spaces over the last week, like multiple spaces, elements. And the element I was present to,
No.
the
Okay. Yeah,
oh,
I
it
can
got
hear
cut.
you.
The
Yes,
element
the
I was
element.
talking about.
I can hear you.
Yeah, you good. I was looking away. The element I was thinking about
Mm.
earlier today was air. Um, and it may have been because I went on a run this morning and I have asthma. Running is
Got
not
it.
always easy, and it's been a journey. And so I think I was just present to how to regulate air,
Yes.
and also that I was breathing, right? And could
Mm.
shift the way I was breathing or calm the breath down. So I'm working with air today. And I love air also because it's not visible to me, but
Mm.
it's present and moving, right? And evident
Beautiful.
in other ways. And I love thinking about
Wow.
air that way. So air. And my run was one way I resourced myself. And
Wow.
I'm going to go into
Love
the
that.
beehives
So
after our
please say
call and
hello
resource
to the
myself
bees for
that way.
me. I'm
I
fatally
will.
allergic to them, but I send
Oh,
from a
yeah.
healthy distance. I'm going to be there with you, resourcing myself next to your beehive. And it's funny you called in the element of air, because here in southern Portugal, we're having like a windstorm. So that's another way in which, isn't that funny?
Oh,
So yeah,
yeah.
so
Had no
air is
idea.
very prevalent right now as well in my corner of the world. Michelle, thank you so, so much. I am always just so resourced and happy, and just feel the depths with you when we meet. And like I say, I'm going to come visit you in Winston-Salem very soon. Speak it into existence, name the thing, we're doing
Thank you.
it.
Yeah. Name the thing, make it happen. Thank you for
It's my
inviting me to be
pleasure.
part of
So
this
you all
journey.
go
So
check
good to
out
be in
Michelle's
community.
website, sign up to her newsletter, sign up to my newsletter. Please sign up to Bio Akomolafe. He's coming up, but he's not on Instagram. So you all got to sign up for the Zoom link. It's going to be amazing. And then he's going to be the last Ashtanga Intersections, Emergent Healing Spaces I do before breaking for the summer. And the replay is going to be up for folks who have just been kind of weaving in and out. Michelle, have a beautiful rest of the day, and sending you so much love. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, Wambui.